Well, good morning, everybody. This is the very first Zoom presentation for me, so hopefully this will go fairly okay. So here we go, bees, beneficials, and blooms. A little bit about myself. Yes, Master Gardener since 1994. After I took the class, I decided to change my career, and I went into horticulture. And for a number of years, I was just doing, design, install, things like that. And then Stanton Gill approached a number of us about a new program doing integrated pest management for the nursery industry, which I got to get in on and get trained for. And the insect thing was just so exciting that I pretty much stopped doing everything else and started just doing integrated pest management consulting. So, I'm out all season long looking at insects, good ones, bad ones, and, everybody in between, and seeing what's happening out there in the landscape. A part of IPM then is talking to and educating the growers about, less pesticide use and beneficial insects and building up populations. So that's how this talk sort of was born. I'm also a beekeeper. I've been keeping bees for about 7 years now. So let's talk about them first, since they're my favorite. They are not indigenous to the United States. We brought them here by European settlers when we came over to pollinate our crops. Although recently there has been a find of a honeybee that was here and then kind of went away. So I don't know about that particular species, but there was one here apparently before we all were here. But the ones that are here now are from Europe. Over $26 million of ag produce are attributed to honeybee pollination in Maryland alone. More than 100,000 pounds of honey are produced by Maryland beekeepers, and these figures are already a couple of years old. I'm sure we're making way more than that as far as honey now. Every year we have so many new beekeepers in our Montgomery County Beekeepers Association. Bees are social. Honeybees are social. They are perennial. They live in a colony with one queen, her workers, which are all female, and the drones, which are unfertilized eggs that become males. And their sole purpose is to go out and mate with other females, with other queens. Colonies overwinter and they live presumably for years. Honeybees are responsible for about 80% of the pollination of fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables in the US. Bumblebees, these guys are native. There are 50 known species in North America. These are those large, plump, fuzzy bees. They are able to fly and forage in lower temperatures than honeybees because of that hairy coating on their bodies. They are social insects like honeybees, and they do live in a colony. However, they all die in the winter except the queen. She flies off into the woods. She hangs out in the leaf litter for the winter and then emerges in the springtime and makes a whole nother colony. Typically, their colony is located in the ground, and they are also very valuable pollinators. They're responsible for about 15% of the pollination of US crops. They have nice long tongues, so they're very well suited for pollinating cool season crops.
Hey Marie, I just wanted to check in because we can't see your presentation. Do you have that up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You want to go ahead and share your screen with us so we can see it?
Okay, so anyway, back to the bumblebees. So they have nice long tongues, and they are not only well suited for pollinating cool season crops, they also are used for vegetables like tomatoes, blueberries, cranberries, watermelons, and lots of other things. There are lots of other bees out there. Maryland's home to like 437 species of native bees. These are teeny tiny, beautiful little guys that are sort of under the radar. We never see them. They're just out there doing their thing. So let's talk about some of these various bee families. We have squash bees. These are specialized pollinators of squash, pumpkin, and gourds. They visit flowers early, around sunrise, so they're out before many other bees are active. We have halictid bees. These are also called sweat bees. Most of these species have shiny metallic colored bodies, although some do not, but most are like the shiny green and things like that. These guys are generalists. They visit many different flowers. They're also important pollinators for many wildflowers, stone fruits, apples, and alfalfa. Both of these families of bees nest in the ground. There are andrena bees. These are minor bees. They also nest in tunnels in the ground. They are solitary for the most part, and some of the earliest bees to emerge in the springtime. One species is the sole pollinator for spring beauties, those beautiful little woodland plants in the woods. And you can see right here that there's one right there visiting a flower. Then we have megachilid bees. These are your mason and leafcutter bees. They are in this family. The blue orchard bee is also in this family. Most of these guys nest in holes found in wood. Blue orchard bees are very docile, and they're often used for pollination in apple orchards. Then we have the good guys. These are my favorites. These are predatory insects. Okay, these are some of these beneficials. These guys are insects whose young or adults or both will feed directly on other insects. So spiders are great. They're not technically an insect. They're in the arachnid family, but they eat beetles, they eat caterpillars, flies, moths, pretty much whatever they can get their hands on. Many different species commonly found in the landscape. This little guy was cool. I saw this on a piece of plant material in a nursery. It was eating, what do we see here? A brown marmorated stink bug, which is awesome. You know, once our beneficials realized that the stink bugs, these marmorated stink bugs were a food source, populations started going down. I don't know if you guys noticed that. After the first couple of years that they were here, their populations went way down, because our good guys figured it out, that they were a food source. If you see these little tiny things around here, which I didn't until I took that picture and went home and downloaded it, these are little like fly-like things. I didn't know what they were or what they were doing here. And I sent this picture over to Paula Shrewsbury at Maryland, and she wrote back that these were little kleptocytic insects. So these guys are actually stealing all the like guts and juices that are coming off of this stink bug as the spider is eating it, which I thought was really cool, because all of this is going on in the space of like the size of a dime. There's lots going on out there in the landscape if you open your eyes and you look. Assassin bugs, these guys are really cool. The adults and the nymphs will feed on all kinds of different bad guys. They have very long beaks, which they use to stab prey. So here they are in the egg form. And it's important when you're looking at beneficial insects to understand what all of their stages look like, so that, you know, you don't see something and go, oh my God, what do I have? What do I do to kill it? So here are the egg masses, and they love to lay their eggs on smooth bark of trees. Here they are just emerging out, and they almost look like spiders here. But they grow up to be these big, giant insects. They're like an inch, inch and a half big. They have this lovely folding, piercing mouth part. So yeah, you don't want to really handle those, because, you know, if they feel threatened, they're going to stab you, right? But they're fantastic for big caterpillars. They'll eat things like Japanese beetles, and, you know, just really good to have out there. Here's another kind of assassin bug. This one's called a wheel bug, because it's got this really cool looking, you know, half a wheel on its back there. And again, it's eating a brown marmorated stink bug, so super awesome for them. And they'll eat all different kinds of really larger pest insects. We also have soldier beetles. These guys, the adults will feed on aphids, caterpillars, such as bagworms and other insects. Their eggs are laid in the soil and their larvae eat the eggs and larvae of other insects that are, living in the soil. And if you notice, see these good guys, they will transition, they will eat insects when pest insects are around. And when pest insect populations go down, they transfer over to pollen and nectar sources. So if you're planting a lot of things that are available for them to eat, they will already be there in a landscape or in a nursery waiting for a pest outbreak. And they will migrate back and forth from, floral resources to insect resources. Lady beetles, everybody knows what the adult looks like, of course, but do you know what the egg clusters look like? These bright yellow barrel-shaped eggs. Do you know what the larva looks like? Kind of like a little crocodile. Lots of different types out there. This is a twice-stabbed lady beetle, completely reverse color, body's black and the dots are orange. This particular one is really good at eating scale insects. This is what the larva looks like, and doesn't it look like a mealy bug? But this is a good, beneficial lady beetle larva eating some tulip tree scale on a magnolia. Lacewings, another really good predatory beneficial insect. The adults look like this. They just kind of hang out in the landscape. The larvae can eat, 350 aphids a day. This is what they look like. They're so voracious that their eggs are laid on stalks, so that when these insects hatch out, they have to crawl down before they go start finding things to eat. So presumably they won't eat each other as they're emerging, but they are very good, voracious predatory feeders. Then we have syrphid flies. We have predatory flies. They look like bees. They're bee mimics. See that? Their larvae are maggots, legless. They feed on aphids, scales, thrips, and other small soft-bodied insects. A single syrphid larva can consume hundreds of aphids in a couple of weeks. The adults, again, do look like bees, but they only have 2 wings, not 4 wings like honeybees, and they have very short antennas, whereas bees have much longer ones. There are lots of different little parasitic insects out there as well. So these guys, instead of eating the pest insect, they will lay an egg. And then that egg will develop in or on a host insect. So there are lots of different parasitic wasps out there. Some of them are teeny tiny. They attack caterpillars, leafhoppers, aphids, flies, scales, beetles, true bugs. Pretty much every insect out there will have some sort of little parasitic wasp associated with it. Here I am in a nursery. This is a blue spruce. It's late May. I'm looking for bagworm emergence. And I see one little bag here. And what do I see? I see a little insect going round and round this bag. And when I took my picture, I saw, wow, this is a little parasitic wasp. And she was tapping around to see where she could lay a nice egg, to get on that bagworm. So again, they're out there. If you've got things for them to access, they'll be hanging out and waiting for the pest insects. Lots of different little ones, little wasps will lay eggs on aphids. I'm sure you guys as gardeners have seen this in your vegetable garden. Again, these are pupal cases of parasitic wasps. When I'm in the nursery, same thing. I will see that on things like this catalpa sphinx moth. And if I see lots of those pupal cases, then I know there's some good population of, parasitic wasps out there. These guys, you may see these in the fall. These are blue digger wasps, shiny sort of blue-black color, and you will see the females in late summer and early fall, and they're flying around the turf, your lawn, about 1 or 2 feet above the turf grass. What she's doing, she's looking for those terrible turf pests, And when she senses one in the ground, she drops down and digs a hole, gets down to the grub and lays an egg on it, hence her name, digger wasp. So again, she'll be hanging out on floral resources and then going over into your yard to lay some eggs on all those nasty pests. Here's another type of those wasps that I saw like 2 years ago, never seen it before. Different species, but same, you know, parasitic wasp, just gorgeous. There are parasitic flies out there too, technid flies, okay? These guys are teeny tiny, they're hanging out on the flowers, and then they will go over to a host insect and lay an egg on it, and that egg will hatch and enter that insect and feed on them. So they will lay eggs on things like cutworms, tent caterpillars, sawflies. One female can lay up to 6,000 eggs, and they can go through a whole life cycle in 3 weeks. So, you know, again, you put some flowers in for these guys, you'll have them there and they'll be ready to do battle when the bad guys come. All right. Do we want to stop for any questions at this point before we move on?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. So one of the questions we have is someone who's just moved their garden. If they see a caterpillar with eggs on its back in their old garden, would it be useful to move it to the new garden since the caterpillar would be dying before pupating and they could kickstart the wasp population in the new garden?
Well, I mean, yeah, you could take that caterpillar with you.
Okay, and then another question. This year, some folks have been finding a lot of grubs in both large flower beds at their home. Should they be concerned and try to remove the grubs?
Well, when I find those big C-shaped grubs when I'm, you know, planting sunflowers or doing any sort of work in the garden, I usually take them out and lay them out somewhere where it's very obvious. And, you know, the birds who are fledging young right now, they will come and get them like within minutes.
Great.
So that's a great way.
Excuse me, last question for now. Are carpenter bees beneficial? They do make some small holes in the deck, but they're inclined to leave them if overall they are helpful.
Well, they are. Didn't we just have an email come out about that? I think it was from the Maryland State
HGIC.
Yeah, about how beneficial they are. Yes, they do some damage, and you know there are sort of protocols that you can minimize that damage, but they are an important beneficial.
Excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
This is Barbara Graham. I have two questions actually. One, is there anything that will eat milkweed bugs? Because I have a lot of milkweed, and every year I have millions of milkweed bugs.
Oh, wow.
And my second question is, I put up a mason bee house. What do mason bees do?
Oh, they were there in my talk. We can go back. There's several things that they do. They're in that megachilid family right here.
Oh, okay.
So they're very good with pollination of, you know, certain plants. So yes, they're good guys, and you want to you want to keep them there so that they're out pollinating various plants. As far as the milkweed bugs, you know, milkweed is a plant very similar to things like oak. Have you ever noticed like oak trees have a million things associated with them? Same thing with hackberries. They have caterpillars, they have moths that attack them. They have, you know, this, they have that. I mean, milkweed bugs and milkweed sort of co-evolved, you know, so they're there. They're going to be there with, you know, all the other insects and caterpillars that are associated. The oleander aphids get on the milkweeds. I mean, you can't really treat that particular one thing without sort of impacting all the other beneficial things that are hanging out there on the milkweed. So, I mean, to me, I would rather just tolerate it because, again, it's providing food sources for so many different things.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been removing them, so I should stop
I
doing
mean, you
that.
can, yeah, if you want to hand pick them, that's fine.
You know, that's a lot of work.
Well,
We had one more question come in. How does the chemical treatment of invasive vinca affect beneficial insects?
well, we'll talk a little bit coming up on pesticides. That's in this next little block. So, you
Great.
know,
All right. So we're going to go ahead and pause the questioning for now, and Marie can keep going.
okay. So a couple things to consider. You want a mixture of flowering plants that'll draw in the most diversity because you're going to vary the size and shape of the flowers. You know, everybody's got different tongue lengths and things like that. Everyone has different flight heights. So different sizes, different shapes will draw in the good guys, more of a population. You, of course, want to plan for a full season of flowering because everyone's out there pretty much all season long. But what I like to tell people is early spring and then late summer to fall, those are the critical times. We in Maryland, especially as beekeepers, we have a very challenging season where our nectar flow as it is super short. So really the most food is available to everybody from April to the end of June. About 4th of July, everyone's taking their honey off the beehives. And if those bees have not made enough food for the year in that short period from April to the end of June, you know, we have to feed those bees because they're going to starve to death. So everybody, all of the insects are out there fighting for whatever's left, you know, any little tiny thing blooming in late summer to fall. So that it's very critical at that point. And then in the very early spring when, you know, they're ramping up, they need a lot of food to ramp up their populations. For us here in Maryland, other states are lucky. They have a much longer season. They have 2 flows, but we just don't seem to have it. And when we get these springs, like here we go again, when April's colder than March and it's so rainy and they're not able to get out and utilize all the nice things that are blooming right now, it makes it very hard for these insects. Plants don't have to all be native. You know, honeybees aren't native, so they usually prefer non-natives over natives, and they really like trees and shrubs more than flowers because, again, they're feeding a perennial. They're trying to, you know, get enough food for a perennial population. So, you know, a tree is like an all-you-can-eat buffet for them. A flower is like tapas. You know, it's not a lot. They got to keep going to many flowers to get the same you know, foods that they would on a tree and shrub. So really, to me, as an IPM consultant, my biggest thing is the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure whatever you're going to put in is going to survive in your landscape, you know. So if you have high deer pressure, you want to go with something that, you know, maybe isn't quite as attractive to deer. You know, if you have a certain condition in your yard, you just want to match that condition to the type of plant. And pest resistance is huge. You know, a lot of people put in natives and they don't understand the disease pressure we have here in Maryland. Again, for something like a straight species phlox, that thing's going to get so bad powdery mildew by midsummer, it's going to collapse. It's not going to have a flower, you know, to give to these guys. You know, rather than put a straight species of something like that in, you know, I would recommend some of these lovely disease-resistant varieties of a phlox that won't collapse from the mildew. It will flower all summer. You don't have to put any fungicide on it. So that's, you know, the kind of thing that's in the back of my mind when I'm trying to select a really good plant for the landscape. Bigger patches are always better than small. Clumps are better than singles, but again, anything is better than nothing. You know, providing anything out there, they will find it and utilize it. You want to avoid doubles, flowers with double flower heads. They're too hard for these guys to access. There are certain pollen-free types of things out there that you can get. Those are great for your cutting garden, but not for your, you know, beneficials. They won't feed them. For those little cavity dwellers, stem dwelling bees, you can put those nesting tubes out. You can leave real skinny, unbarked, smooth lengths of wood out for some of those little bees that will, you know, make little holes and nest in them if you want to put a little bit of, you know, habitat out there for the bees. Okay, so everybody has an opinion about pesticides. They have an opinion about, you know, what's killing the bees. There's lots of misinformation out there on the internet. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about, you know, what's impacting bees and beneficials. For bees, the biggest thing are pathogens and parasites, basically the varroa mite and all of the things associated with the varroa mite. This mite came in from Asia. Our bees, again, are from Europe. They had no sort of, you know, knowledge of this mite. The mite actually attaches to the bees while they're in the brood and pretty much is sucking the body fat out of this thing, you know, the entire life that the bee is there. It's transmitting viruses and just sort of making it generally not as, you know, healthy and robust as this bee would have been otherwise. There's malnutrition. Again, our nectar flow is really short. There's not a whole lot of floral resources out there. And then when we put in habitat fragmentation on top of that, makes it very hard for these guys. And then, of course, there's pesticide exposure, including fungicides. Now, you know, when you see these things on the media, it's all about the neonicotinoids now. This is the most recent, like, bad guy out there, to the point where Maryland banned that particular class of insecticides for homeowners to use. You can still use them if you are a certified pesticide applicator, so commercial people can still use them. So let's look at some of the data, which is really cool. So you can go to the Bee Informed Partnership, and I have a links at the end of this talk to some of this information. They've been sampling hives all over the country for a number of years. And so let's look at what they were finding. This was in 2016. Now, they banned the neonicotinoids in January of 2018. But back in 2016, this is the whole entire country here, up at the top. The biggest slice of the pie as far as chemicals that they were finding in the hives were the miticides that the beekeepers are using to try and control the varroa mite. So almost 40% of the material that they found in the hives was that. Another big chunk, almost 30%, were fungicides. There's a little bit of insecticides and a little bit of herbicides. And when you look down here, this is what they actually found in hives in Maryland. And what they found was carbaryl. Blue is Maryland, black is all samples all over the country. Carbaryl is not a neonicotinoid. Carbaryl is a carbamate. This is, I can't pronounce it, but it's a pyrethrin. And again, the biggest material they found in the hive was thymol. That is a miticide. So, you know, no neonicotinoids there. So are they killing our bees? You know, how are they killing them if they're not even detected in the hives? We'll go to 2017, 2018, same, you know, nothing's really changed as far as, you know, the ratios. A little bit more fungicide, which I know a lot of studies are being done now about fungicides in hives. no one thought that fungicides were impacting bees, but clearly they're bringing it back to their hives. So it's going to have an impact. When you're thinking about chemicals, it's an accumulation. So even if it's a quote good chemical, to control a mite, it's adding to the whole pesticide load. So, when you're thinking about material, does it matter if it's, what it is, it's going to add to the load. If you look in 2018, this was after the ban again. There's lots of different chemicals out there, most of which are the varroa mites control. So, 2,4-D, that is a herbicide, of course. The next one here, it's not listed because there's not enough room, but when you go to the interactive map, it pops up. This is another herbicide called acetochlor. So that's an herbicide. This is a fungicide. Again, lots of fungicides out there. This is a miticide. This is a miticide. This one over here, it's not shown, but this is the thymol again. This is a miticide. So, a lot of miticides are in there. So yes, of course, chemicals, insecticides, herbicides have an impact, but it's really a multifaceted thing that's happening with the insects, especially the bees, and the beneficials too. Now, you can go on to the Xerces Society. This came out a couple of years ago. They were doing toxicity of organic approved pesticides to pollinators. Now you can see lots of highly toxic organics. So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to swap out products. I'm only going to use organic. And actually, a number of years after the Xerces Society put this out, this study came out. They actually were looking at some of these softer botanical insecticides. These are all OMRI listed organics, and how they were impacting honeybees. So the black line, this is the adult honeybee, and the gray is the larva. So what they were doing is, if something flew through, say, garlic extract, 50% of the adults that flew through that would eventually die. If it landed on a flower and they accessed that flower and they brought that food back and fed it to the larvae, about 35% of the larvae died. So eucalyptus oil, pretty high. Roten one, high. Look at neem. Everybody thinks neem's just super, not going to kill anything. Natural, 60% kill rate when adults flew through, and about 50% kill rate for larvae. Citronella, again. And when I look at citronella and garlic, and I think about people spraying their yards for, mosquito control, even if you're using citronella or garlic, you're going to be killing lots of honeybees and, presumably other bees. This was just some experiments that they were doing with honeybees, but, So you want to minimize pesticides. You want to avoid applications when plants are in bloom, right? If you're having your yard done by a company, don't specify you don't want systemic neonicotinoids on things that are highly attractive to bees. Things like hollies and lindens and roses that are single petaled, crepe myrtles, crabs, hawthorns, don't. If you have some prized plant and, you need to have it treated, prune off all the flower buds, You can treat things that aren't super attractive to bees, sure, but the ones that are, you just want to steer clear. Don't spray fungicides on things when they're blooming. Again, select those resistant varieties of your favorite plants. There are lots of them out there. The IPM way is, least toxic, most effective application method and timing, and always, follow the label. This is over here, these two pictures on the right. These are my growers. They all know if they plant it, they're hardly ever using material for many problems. No one treats for aphids anymore because they're planting pollinator belts in between, you know, rows and blocks of trees. And they know that the good guys hang out there and then they'll transfer down the rows when there's problems. Fallow areas are being planted with, you know, pollinator-rich plants. All right, we stop there. And does anybody have any pesticide question?
Yep, we had a lot of questions coming.
Yeah.
So the first one I think you've already answered. Are annuals a helpful plant to include in our gardens? And it sounds like they definitely can be.
Yes.
The right plant. So
Yes.
I think we're good there. The next one is nectar quality of native plants better than non-native plants?
No, I know a lot of people think that, but no. Paula Shrewsbury, Doug Tallamy, they've all done studies, and for most all species of, you know, insects, it doesn't matter as long as you're putting stuff out there and they're utilizing, it's great. There are certain very specialized, you know, insects and plants like that andrena bee I was telling you about that has the sole pollinator of the you know, specific spring beauty, but for the most part, no. And in some cases, and I've got them later when we're looking at the actual specific plants, in some cases, a cultivar is more attractive. It becomes better than the straight species because the flower structure has changed a little bit, and now it's opened it up to even more, you know, a more wider variety of species. So maybe that flower gets a little smaller, and now, you know, a bee with a little shorter tongue who couldn't use that before can now use it because it's a little different.
Got it. Yeah, I think in Doug Tallamy's most recent study, it was mostly everything was fine except for like one very specific cultivar of like a 9-bark shrub.
Right.
So.
Yeah, sometimes they're not as good, and I've got a couple of cultivars too that I highlight that you shouldn't get.
So the next question I think you'll probably cover in the next section, specific recommendations for good early blooming plants.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. What's the balance between keeping our bee population and those who are allergic to bee stings?
Yeah. Well, you know, most bees are just out there doing their thing, having their life. They don't really bother you as long as they're not feeling like you're bothering them or you're attacking them. I mean, for honeybees, I mean, we go in there, we're moving their homes around, we're lifting things up, and you know, they're just happily doing what they're doing. I mean, the only time I've ever been stung is when I'm doing something dumb, you know, like mowing in front of their hive or, you know, stuff like that, or stepping on them.
Right. Yeah, that makes
sense. If you're highly allergic, then, you know, plant your flowers far away so that you can travel in and out of the house or do whatever you do and, you know, not interact with them so much. Right.
Yeah, I think in the question they actually mentioned the word balance, and I think that's the key. It's the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a couple other comments. Those are all the questions that we have for now.
Okay, great. So let's talk about some things you can do. You can put out some water. You know, insects, just like birds and everybody else, they need water, they need minerals. They do the same thing as butterflies as far as like coming and looking for salts and minerals. So they like yucky, dirty water. So at my house, they're either hanging out where we've just dumped over the horse troughs, because I live with like 35 horses here. So they're like, yummy, you know, icky horse, muddy water, we'll take that. You know, mud wasps will come get that. In a suburban setting, you know, you can put little plastic trays out with some sticks and things for them to land on. And, you know, the bees will utilize that. You want to dump that out every, you know, couple days so that mosquitoes don't reproduce in there. They will come to ponds, so, you know, I like to put some floating plants in there so that they can come and, you know, land on the plant and go down and get a drink. that'll keep them from being annoying and, you know, visiting your pool and things like that if you put out some water for them. When we talk about plants for power plants, I like to call them, for insects, there are a couple of resources that I love. This garden plant for honeybees, this came out a couple years ago. The guy, Peter Lintner, was from the University of Delaware. He spent his life's work sort of amassing studies of pollen grains from beehives and what specific plants bees were utilizing. And so he put them in a book and he ranked them from a 1-star, which is good, to a 5-star, which is like fantastic. And these are annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs. So it's a really great book. Dan Potter is another favorite. He's from the University of Kentucky. He's done lots of different studies on bee assemblages. And what I like about Dan is he's looking at just good disease and pest resistant woody plants that we use commonly in the landscape. And he's figuring out what species of bees are utilizing them. For your native bees and your beneficial insects, lots of different sources out there. One I really like that I actually heard at one of our state continuing education programs years ago was Penn State. They had this pollinator trial garden and they were counting all of these perennials that were straight species and cultivars, and they go out and count, you know, how many insects were on each plant in a period of time, and they reported to us about the trial results. So you can go online and look at those too. This is Dan Potter's information. I mean, it's very specific. I mean, look at this, and he ranks them too. He gives you each species of bee that's visiting these things. I mean, that's fantastic. And he's a great guy, and he's doing really good work. So these are the sort of things I've been using when I go out and I'm trying to show people the kind of plants that they can use. So let's talk a little bit about some of these guys. So spring, winter jasmine, Jasminium nudiflorum. This is a lovely fountain-shaped sprawling mounding shrub. 2-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Again, fragrant yellow flowers early, January, March, peak around February. These guys are adaptable to a wide variety of soil types, full sun to shade. They don't have any serious problems, diseases, or insects. You can train these guys up a wall down in Rockville. It's cute. They put them in just street containers and they fountain over, like in front of Dawson's Market. They have a bunch of these in just big, you know, containers. Great, rugged, good early season nectar. Cornelian cherry, Cornus mas, another good one. It can be a large shrub or a small tree depending on how it's trained. Another 2-star nectar and pollen source for bees. Bumble and other native bees will visit the flowers too. Early bloomer again, March for 3 weeks, so good long bloom time. Sun to part shade, adaptable to different soil types and pHs. Red maple blooms in March. Although wind pollinated, these guys are like the very first thing to come out. In the springtime, you will see birds eating the pollen of this. You will see squirrels up in there, you know, lots of different critters on the red maple. And honestly, all the maples, when they bloom, even Japanese maples that are good for these pollinators. 3-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees, but you also see mason bees, mining bees, sweat bees, hoverflies. Like I said, everybody's utilizing the resource. Ornamental cherry, you know, Prunus okami, very lovely plants, beautiful in the landscape, 4-star nectar source for honeybees. Bumblebees will also visit. Full sun to part shade. This particular cherry, very soil tolerant and somewhat drought tolerant after established. Pussy willow, you know, very old cottage garden plant. You can also get a native willow too. Blooms in March. This is a wonderful pollen source. When honeybees are building up their populations in the spring, they need lots of pollen. Why? Well, they make what we like to call bee bread out of pollen. So they're making a food that they're going to feed to their brood. They need lots of pollen, and this is 4 stars worth. So, you know, in the spring when this thing's blooming in my farmyard, you can literally hear the bees on this thing. That'll be full of, you know, bumblebees, honeybees, sweat bees, all kinds of things. The willows are great. They're good for those moist areas. So if you've got that part of your property that just won't drain, the soil's super moist and everything, you know, root rots there, plant some kind of, you know, willow. If they can tolerate it. Service berries, lots of different species out there. They are native, multi-stemmed large shrubs, or you can get them as a single stem tree. It just depends on how they're produced in the nursery. But they bloom in March and April. 1-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees, but this is a really good one for all of your native bees. You will see lots of different native bees on these flowers. They also get lovely red berry in the summer, which the birds love too, and you can make jams and jellies out of. These guys are great. They will tolerate moist or dry soils, sun to part shade. Flowering quince. This is another one of those old-fashioned cottage garden type plants. This becomes a very dense, thorny shrub, 6 to 10 feet tall. So, you know, if you want to prevent kids from walking through your yard, you could plant one of these. They certainly wouldn't go through this thorny shrub. But it blooms for 2 to 3 weeks in the springtime. And again, it's one of those ones that are just covered in insects, a 3-star nectar source for honeybees. Bumblebees and other bees visit the flowers. These guys like sun to part shade. They're drought tolerant and soil adaptable. And the deer don't even seem to touch them. I mean, I've had mine there for 20 years here at my farm and still there. If you're in full shade, Japanese Caria is a good one. This is blooming in one of my clients' yards. We planted this under these gigantic hemlocks, so not very much sun there, covered in honeybees. These are beautiful fountain-shaped shrubs. They have very slender green stems that sort of just arch over, so they're really pretty in the wintertime when it snows. Partial to full shade. This is in a high deer pressure area, not nibbled. Tolerant of dry and wet soils, so a really, really nice shrub. Crab apples, you know, they kind of fell out of favor over the years because of all of the disease problems, especially here in Maryland. We have rust, we have scab, we have powdery mildew. There are a whole complement of really beautiful cultivars out there now that are super, super disease resistant. This is a 4-star nectar source, 3-star pollen source for honeybees. Myriad of other pollinators are on these flowers as well. The Zumi crab is gorgeous. It's 12 to 20 feet tall, full sun, has all kinds of disease resistance and beautiful white flowers. Prairie Fire. This is my absolute favorite crab apple. Has this lovely purpley foliage, these pink blooms, not too big, 15 to 20 feet tall. Fire blight, scab, powdery mildew, and rust resistance. Really beautiful, beautiful crab apple. If you don't have a lot of space, Adirondack is a really neat, narrow U.S. Arboretum introduction. It's gorgeous. The flowers start out, before they open, they're sort of pinkish. And then after they open, they turn white, has gorgeous fruit, has excellent disease resistance. So those are just a couple of the ones. If you don't have a lot of space, the pink princess crab apple is a natural dwarf. It's only 8 feet tall, very low spreading, so it kind of looks like a Japanese maple, really, but very small, excellent disease resistance, very pretty. Hollies, fantastic. All hollies are fantastic for bees. They love the flowers. 3-star nectar and pollen source. Bumblebees, wasps, flies, everybody's on holly. You know, the straight species can get to 40 feet tall. You know, not a lot of us have that kind of room, but there are lots of different cultivars out there. There's one here called Maryland Dwarf that's only 3 feet tall. So, you know, there are different ones out there that you can select for your space requirements. Now, hollies have separate male and female plants, so you want to make sure you're buying one male for every 4 females if you want, you know, nice fruit sets. Elderberry, a lovely native, dense, twiggy, large shrub. This one you'll see oftentimes in just hedgerows or fallow fields. These are good for little carpenter and sweat bees, syrphid flies. You'll see those flowers out around May and June. They get a blue fruit afterwards. These guys are great in that they will do well in dry to wet soil and sun to parched shade. However, they do sort of colonize an area. They will sucker and form a colony. So if you don't have a lot of space or you're concerned about, you know, it sort of taking over, you can select the European elderberry. This one is called Black Lace. This does not colonize. This is a non-suckering form of elderberry. I like it because it's got that beautiful purplish black foliage with pink flowers instead of white. Both species have hollow stems, and they're really good for those, you know, tube-dwelling native bees. They will go in and actually make, you know, a home in there, in the pith of broken stems. There's also a lovely green foliage version of the European elderberry. Hawthorns, again, are another one where you know, they fell out of favor because of disease pressure, but there are resistant selections now from native species. Hawthorns bloom May to June. They are a 3-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. They tolerate a wide variety of sites and adverse conditions. They do like full sun. So this is Crusader hawthorn. This one's 15 to 20 feet tall, pollution tolerant, disease resistant, very few thorns. And then you can get the Winter King Washington hawthorn, which is a little bit broader and slower growing than Cruzam. Both are really awesome. Oak leaf hydrangea is one of our native shrubs. This one blooms in May to July. 3-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees, bumblebees, syrphid flies, and others will visit the flowers. These guys do well in sun to parched shade and well-drained soil. They are fairly tolerant of dry soil, and they're gorgeous really three seasons out of the year. They have lovely burgundy fall color, and then they have nice peely bark in the winter time, so they are ornamental year-round. I put this one in, I leave it in. I know people don't have a lot of space, but I gotta tell you, black gum, our native Nyssa sylvatica. I came across a survey of insects visiting blossoms in Maryland, and they found 46 bee species visiting these little insignificant flowers. Again, probably because they're so small, so many species can utilize. So, you know, if you want one big tree in your yard, maybe go for a black gum. Talk about some perennials. Hellebores, all of them are wonderful early season nectar source for honeybees. But the stinking hellebore is actually a little better as far as attractiveness to them. This one is the most visited by honeybees. It's nice because it's evergreen, it's deer resistant, and will grow in that nice partial to full shade. Spiderwort, another nice native perennial, 3-star nectar and pollen source for bees. Bumblebees, sweat bees, syrphid flies will also visit the flowers. This one blooms May to June in partial to full shade and average soil. You can cut these guys back after they bloom and encourage a secondary bloom later in the season. And minor bulbs, don't forget them. They are super critical early season sources for honeybees. Honeybees will be out year round as long as it's over 50 degrees. So in the wintertime when they emerge, there's not a whole lot going on. You might see them at your bird feeders sort of digging through the seed duff, or they'll be going through your compost pile. A lot of times they're like sifting through, you know, your coffee grinds. They're looking for anything. So, you know, some of these minor bulbs are fantastic for them. The snowdrops are two-star nectar, 3-star pollen. The winter aconite, 3-star nectar and pollen. The crocus, you know, 2-star nectar, 3-star pollen. So really critical for them. And I like to throw in the wild things that are out there. Dandelion. I mean, they'll bloom all winter long sporadically in my farm fields. These are important supplemental nectar and pollen sources for a myriad of critters. Not only honeybees, but lots of other things will visit the dandelion. Okay. You want to stop here and ask questions? Or you want me to keep going to summer?
You can keep going. We're good on questions.
Okay, great. So we have a deciduous holly, winterberry holly. This is Ilex verticillata. It's a lovely native dense twiggy shrub. Blooms a little later than the evergreen hollies. Blooms in June. Lovely though. Bees love it. Bumblebees, all kinds of critters are on the flowers. It's native to swampy areas. It prefers acidic soil, highly amended, but I have to tell you, it's very tolerant of less than optimal conditions. I've seen it in, you know, gas station parking lots. So, you know, it's a lovely, rugged shrub. Here it is in a landscape. And you can get all kinds of cultivars. So if you don't have a lot of space, they have, you know, very small cultivars as well. Beautyberry, there are native and non-native versions. Both are 4-star nectar sources for honeybees. They are lovely, pretty habit. The non-native is more fountain shaped. The American is a little more upright, but they are both very pretty. They bloom in June. They do well in sun to parched shade and average soil. And they both have these wonderful electric magenta berries that the birds love in the fall. So really good all around. Summer sweet is another nice native shrub. Starts blooming in the summertime and really just keeps going for a long, long bloom through the fall. Full sun to heavy shade. This thing will do good in wet to average soil. So a really rugged plant. I love plants like that that are, you know, tolerant of a wide range of conditions and light requirements, and don't get a lot of pest or disease problems. This is one of those plants. There's a pink version too. Look at that gorgeous rosea. Caryopteris, bluebeard, a nice low-mounded deciduous sort of sub-shrub, I guess I call it, 2 to 3 feet tall. It has aromatic foliage and deep blue fragrant flowers. July through at least September, 4-star nectar, 2-star pollen source for honeybees. Bumblebees love to visit the flowers too. Full sun, average soil that's well drained. This is very drought tolerant. This is dark night in my landscape, but there are lots of different cultivars out there. Russian sage. This is the 2020 PA Horticultural Society's gold medal winner for full sun. This is Little Spire. It's only 2 to 3 feet tall. 3-star nectar, 2-star pollen source for honeybees. Lots of other pollinators and bees visit those flowers. Has that aromatic silvery gray leaves, blue to violet blooms, drought and salt tolerant, deer and rabbit resistant. It likes to be in that nice dry sort of average thin soil, not highly amended. Cut the plants back in early spring as your new growth is starting to flush out. Coreopsis, pretty much everybody knows about verticillata. The Penn State pollinator trials, they actually found that this cultivar Zagreb had more visits, pollinator visits, than the species, than the straight species of Coreopsis verticillata. 24 species of bees and syrphid flies visited the blooms of this particular cultivar. There's also lanceolata. It has the wider leaves. They had 13 bees and syrphid flies visiting those. Rosea, which is good for your wetter areas. 12 bees and syrphid flies were visiting those blooms. 1-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Coreopsis likes full sun, average to dry soil unless you're rosea, which, you know, like I said, likes that wet situation. There's another one. This one's one of my favorites. This one's called Route 66. Zagreb and straight verticillata, they have a really good flush in the summer and then they just kind of peter out. This guy starts blooming in the summer and just keeps going and going and going. And the little tiny native bees love this one because the flowers are so tiny. It is the longest blooming Coreopsis I've ever known. And I keep buying it every time I'm, you know, out. I just like want to get more and keep putting it in because it's just so great with these little pollinators. This is one I just started growing a couple of years ago called Gold Standard. The straight native species is 7 feet tall, floppy, and disease prone. Mount Cuba Center trialed a bunch of Coreopsis. You can go on to their website and see the data. But this is one of the trial front runners. It had excellent resistance to powdery and downy mildews, very strong stems that don't need a lot of staking. They're not flopping. Masses of yellow flowers with dark centers starting in July and then keeps going for at least 6 weeks. The bees love this particular one. It's rhizomatous, but slowly spreading, like 2 feet in 3 years. But the bloom time on this thing is fabulous. If you have the space, you might want to track that one down. This is another one called Summer Sunshine. This was the highest Coreopsis rated in Mount Cuba Center's trial. It's a cultivar of a native, 30 inches tall by 40 inches wide. It's got this lush, dense mound of beautiful gold flowers. Again, starts in September, continues for 6 weeks. Another slowly spreading one. And it was one of the most disease resistant in the trial. So again, late season, that's what we're aiming for the pollinators. So this one would be a good choice. Obedient plant is another native perennial, blooms June to September. 1-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Bumblebees also love to visit the flowers. These guys bloom sun to a fair amount of shade and average soil. They are deer resistant, but the straight species can be super aggressive and really take over a spot. So again, go out and find those cultivars of natives. Miss Manners is a white non-spreader. Pink Manners is a non-spreading pink cultivar. There are others out there as well. So track those down. Everybody knows milkweed's great for the, monarchs. It's also really good for honeybees and lots of different other native bees and pollinators, butterflies, everybody's visiting. Lacewings, lady beetles, they'll all be there. Incarnata, the swamp milkweed, likes full sun, moist soil, although it is a little tolerant of drier conditions. Dan Potter just did a whole thing on milkweeds and, you know, what they attract and who likes which one's best. They found that Soulmate, Cinderella, and Ice Ballet, these 3 cultivars of the swamp milkweed, were actually more attractive to various bee species than straight incarnata. So again, if you're looking for some plants that are going to attract a more wide range of critters, maybe seek these 3 out instead of the straight species, and that way your bees will be more happy. If you're in a drier situation, you might want to go with tuberosa, the butterfly weed. This one's indigenous to drier areas, but still a 3-star nectar, 2-star pollen source for bees. And, you know, again, all the other bees will be, and pollinators will be visiting those flowers. It likes very, you know, average soil in full baking sun. And all milkweeds are deer and rabbit resistant because of that, you know, milky sap that they exude that gives the insects the ability to be poisoned. So the deer won't eat it, the rabbits don't eat it. Bee balm, we have 2 different ones out there. Both are native. We have one native to wet, rich soil, that's Didyma. Other native to dry, poor soil areas, that's Fistulosa. Most of the Monarda in the trade are hybrids between the 2. Lots of different critters visit the flowers of them. 2-star nectar, 1-star pollen source for honeybees. Peter's Fancy Fuchsia had the 2nd highest counts of insect visits in the Penn State trial, so that would be one you might want to track down. Jacob Klein, however, had the least number of visits, so that would be one that you would want to avoid if you're trying to attract those insects in. Violet Queen, this one scored very high in Mount Cuba Center. They did a whole trial of Monarda for disease resistance. This particular cultivar they found was, again, much more attractive to bees than some of the others. Why? You know, who knows? The structure might have changed just enough to make it more interesting, more available, and so this one would be one to track down as well. If you were going to plant just one perennial in your garden for bees and other beneficials, this would be the one. Some kind of mountain mint. Now, it's not a true mint, and it doesn't live in the mountains. I'm not quite sure why it's called mountain mint, but it does have aromatic foliage. This one had the highest number of insect visitors in the Penn State Extension pollinator trial. They observed 51 different insect species on the plant in 2 minutes. And here it is in my garden, and you can see right here, there's like all different kinds of critters on this thing. Very small flowers. So again, more things can access it. There are different species out there. There's American, there's clustered, there's a bunch. They are 1 to 3 feet tall. They bloom July through September. They're amazing. I would highly recommend them. Yes, they self-sow. Yes, they try and colonize a bit. I like to put them in a place where they're just gonna fight it out with, you know, some other things that are the same way. And, you know, that little corner's my pollinator area, and that's what I do. I just put them in a separate place. You know, you may not want them like in a mixed border somewhere where they may take over, you know, more space than you want them to. Joe Pieweed, everybody knows this one, pretty common. It's a native, it's big, it flops over, you know, it likes to be in moist areas on my farm. I always find it like down by the creek. Little Joe is a different, smaller form. It's a different species, Eupatorium dubium, but much more refined. Here it is at my old house. 3 feet tall, doesn't flop over, a little more, agreeable to a home garden situation than the straight Joe Pye weed. But 2-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. These guys do well in sun to part shade, moist soil, but they're very, very tolerant of drier conditions. Our state flower, black-eyed Susan. Lovely, 1-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Lots of other things visit the flower though. Lots of our native bees will be there. The flower flies will be on there, the predatory plant bugs. Black-eyed Susans, they like hot, sunny, dry situations. This one is gorgeous. This is a native cultivar called Little Henry. Very nice, upright, compact grower. Lovely quilled petals on this thing. The bees love it. Very long bloom time, July to October. Reportedly deer and rabbit resistant, has really good drought tolerance and very disease tolerant as well.
Marie, we've had a couple questions if you want to take a few.
Sure.
Awesome. So the first one is summer sweet good for erosion control in shade?
I'm not so sure for erosion control because it's just it's a shrub.
Mm-hmm.
You might want something a little more ground covery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it's on a slope.
Yeah. Let's see. And we did have a question about our butterfly weed and butterfly bush, the same thing, but that one's been answered in the chat, so we're good to go. Another question about butterfly weed though, will it work in containers?
Sure, yeah, you can put it in a container.
Yeah. Are plants that are bred to be sterile, such as cultivars of Buddleia, do they still have benefits to pollinators?
Well, I haven't actually seen a Buddleia with the sterile flowers. Somebody else could answer that as far as like, are they visiting? But I believe that you could still have nectar even though you're not, even though you don't have, even if the flower's sterile, but I don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually not sure about that one either. Some folks are getting ready for spring garden cleanup and they're wondering how long should they leave stalks up in the spring to benefit the pollinators?
Well, what I've been told is that like all your beneficials are hanging out in those stalks through the winter, so you shouldn't like clean your garden up in the fall. You should wait and do it in the springtime. So, around about now when things are starting to wake up and start growing out again, I would be cutting stuff down now. And you can always, if you're seeing, like your egg cases from praying mantis or whatever, you can hold on to those and put them right back in your garden, if you're pruning them off of a stalk or something. But now would probably be a good time to start doing that, cleaning it up.
Excellent. And then we had a comment about Peter's fancy fuchsia and Judith's fancy fuchsia being the same Monarda plant, and they get a little bit confused in the trade.
Oh, they're the same cultivar or no?
I think that's what they're saying. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. That's all we've got for now.
Okay, awesome. All right, so New York ironweed, this is another native perennial, 3-star nectar and 2-star pollen source for honeybees. Blooms summer to fall, found in moist thickets in low areas. On my farm, again, it'll just spontaneously be growing in any like open wet spot. It's pretty big though, 3 to 5 feet tall. There's another smaller species called narrow-leaved ironweed. This is a cultivar of a native called iron butterfly, 3 feet tall. So a little more refined, a little smaller, a little finer texture. But again, really good pollen and nectar for your insects. What I like about this one, it's a little more heat and cold hardy, and it's a little, it can withstand a little flooding, which, you know, around here, this is a new sort of requirement for me. You know, can you take some flooding? Because we're getting so many rain events that a lot of things that don't like wet feed are pretty much croaking. So anything that can tolerate that periodically is a good plant in my book. So that would be one. All right, let's talk a little bit about some annuals. So we have the native Coreopsis tinctoria. So the annual version of Coreopsis. Again, a one-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Goldfinches love the seeds of this as well. Lots of other little bees will visit the flowers. Blooms June to September. Likes hot, dry, average soils and full sun. You will often see these guys in meadow mixes. Fan flowers, Scaevola. This is a lovely container, sort of trailing annual. Wants to be out in spring after frost, so you know, wait till May to put this guy out, but continues blooming all through the fall. You can get them in white, blue, purple, or pink. 3-star nectar, 2-star pollen source for honeybees. Butterflies love the flowers of this. They're self-cleaning. You don't have to deadhead them or prune them. They do well in, you know, hot, dry situations, full sun to part shade. It's a fantastic container plant. You know, it's beneficial to the insects. Out on my farm, I do big drifts of various meadow mixes. I've found personally that annual mixes are easier to maintain because, you know, you lightly till the ground just to disturb it, plant out the seeds. They all come out at once, so they're outperforming the weed seeds, and you're not having to try and, you know, battle a bunch of stuff coming in. I've found when I do big drifts like that, it'll last a few years and then I have to replant. Cosmos, both bipinnatus and sulphurus, are good, you know, beneficial insect plants. They're 1-star nectar and pollen sources for honeybees. Goldfinches will also eat the seeds of them. And again, just like the Coreopsis, they want full sun, average to dry soil. I went out in my meadow in July and just took pictures of who all was out there on the various annuals, and you can see all different species of dragonflies, hummingbird hawk moths, you know, little bees, all kinds of butterflies, and super long bloom time. So here it is in July. Here's that same strip in October. I like to do strips just like in a nursery. I'll do a strip of pollinator plants right next to, you know, my vegetable garden. And that way I know that they're already going to be out there, and, you know, any pest outbreaks happen, they'll be right there ready to go. Indian blanket, another little native annual that's often in those mixes as well. 2-star nectar and 1-star pollen source for honeybees, and lots of the little native bees will also visit the flower. What are the wild things out there in the summer? Well, we've got all of those sumacs. There's staghorn, shining, you know, those are 4-star nectar and 2-star pollen source for honeybees. Lots of different native bees are on that. They also have those hollow stems, so there are lots of species using them for nest sites. You often see these guys just in hedgerows, field margins, but you can buy, there are sumacs in the trade. This is tiger eyes, which is fantastic. One of my nursery men are growing this one with this nice sort of yellowy green foliage, really sets off the seed heads nicely. So you can actually go buy these. Okay, now it's fall, so now our resources are getting really critical. So anything we can grow at this point is going to be really welcome. 7 sunflower is one of those plants. This is a large multi-stem shrub. or small single stem tree, again, depending on how it's grown in the nursery. This thing is covered, okay? Everybody loves this plant. So 3-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. All of your migrating monarchs will be visiting this thing. It's called Seven Sun because each little flower whorl has 7 tiny flowers around it. So sepal clusters also remain and turn red. So it's got really nice ornamental value for a long period of time. Very rugged. It does well in sun to partial shade. It's soil adaptable and drought tolerant and does not get pest or disease issues. There's a new cultivar out there that's a little smaller. This one's called Temple of Bloom. I love that name. It's 5.5 to 10 feet tall. The leaves on this one are deeply veined, and so they stand out a little more in the landscape. And as the season progresses, they grow large and develop a twisty tip, so it gives a little more ornamental flair. Peely bark, deep red bracts after the flowers are done blooming. This one blooms a teeny bit earlier than the other one. And I actually tracked this one down and put it in my garden this year. I'm super excited to see how that works out. Glossiobelia, this one is used a lot in, parking lots, foundation plantings. It's super rugged. It's a semi-evergreen shrub, 3 to 6 feet tall. Blooms June to frost. Again, the monarchs will be all over this one in the fall. Super soil adaptable, does well in full sun. I've seen it blooming in at least half shade, if not more. Very adaptable, very drought tolerant, and there are lots of different cultivars out there to suit your situation. Sedum, any of the sedum are going to be fantastic for bees. 3-star nectar and pollen source. Lots of other beneficial insects visit the flower. Bloom summer to fall depending on the species. You can get them for full sun all the way to shade. There are some shade sedums out there. This is Autumn Joy, which of course I love because it blooms late when they really need that nectar and pollen. So it starts blooming September and blooms through into October. Asters, these are very important late season nectar sources for all sorts of beneficials and pollinators. 2-star nectar and pollen source for honeybees. Purple dome, worst in the Penn State trial. Very few insect visitors, so do not plant that one out if you want to attract your pollinators. Bluebird, the smooth aster, was in the top 5 for sheer number of visits in the Penn State trial. I actually finally found that one this spring too, and so I'm anxiously awaiting it blooming this year so that I can see how good it is. Goldenrod, another native, fantastic, late blooming perennial. Of all of the goldenrods though, Fireworks is actually a little higher rated as far as honeybees, 4-star nectar, 3-star pollen. Everybody else is 2-star. The reason being is Fireworks flowers are teeny tiny. So again, they're open and available to a wider range of species of critters. It's beautiful. It's got a nice airy texture to it. You can see it here in my old house next to the asters. So it just it gives a nice light, airy effect. And see how tiny the flowers are. So this is just a couple of minutes out in my garden in September, and you can see all of the beneficial insects in there accessing that. And we know annual sunflowers are great for the pollinators, but the perennial ones also very important. This is my favorite sunflower, the Maximilian sunflower. It's humongous. It gets to be 10 feet tall. I plant that with that mountain mint, and they battle it out because this one will form a colony as well. But it doesn't even start to bloom until October. So literally Nothing else is blooming at that time, and it will continue to bloom until frost, so well into November. And everyone is on this thing. There are smaller varieties and cultivars out there. So this one's called Table Mountain. This is a like 2 to 3 foot tall cultivar of a willow leaf sunflower. This one I can't remember now. Is that back at my old house? This was a swamp sunflower, a teeny tiny one that was like 1.5 feet tall. All of them very attractive to the pollinators. So, you know, there's one out there for any garden situation. Sunflowers like, of course, to be in the sun though. So, you know, you do have to have a fair amount of sun. And your allium bulbs, do not forget them. You can get them blooming in the spring, summer, and fall. All are really great for your bees and other pollinators. And because they're, you know, an onion, they are deer resistant. They don't like to eat them, and they're very drought tolerant. But again, you need that full sun situation. And then I've got resources for you guys. Some of the information that I called, this is where I was getting that from. All right, we have questions?
Yes. So you had a couple of plants that you were saying were working well for flooding in your yard, and some folks wanted to know if that applied also to brackish and tidal water in addition to fresh water.
That I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check. I have a different talk that I talk about, you know, salt tolerance in plants.
Got it.
I didn't really incorporate that into this particular one, so I don't have that off the top of my head. I'd have to look.
Got it. Okay. Another question that we had was, we've noticed hundreds of Chinese mantis egg cases in our meadow. Are they considered beneficial, or are they starting to become invasive, and should they try to remove the egg cases?
I've not read anywhere where we're considering them as invasive. You know, they are predatory. They will, you know, they're, well, like all praying mantis, they are generalists, so they'll eat whatever. They'll eat good things, they'll eat bad things. So we just, you know, we just kind of tolerate them, I guess. I mean, they're
Sure. We have one person who has sedum blooms that are being eaten by birds every year, and are there any suggestions to save them?
Wow. Those birds must be hungry.
Yeah, that's not something I've seen either.
I mean, you could try to net them, because the mesh, you know, will be wide enough that the insects could get through, but the birds would not, you know, be there.
Right. Okay, what about green and gold chrysogenum as a ground cover? Is that beneficial to bees?
Yes, it is. I don't put it in here because I find it highly fussy, and it doesn't seem to want to stick around. I don't think it likes wet feet, and I think it just kind of goes away, you know, in the winter when we get that nice squishy wet soil. I find it, you know, a little too fussy for conditions here.
Got it. Okay, and then I think that's all of the sort of subject matter based questions. We did have a lot of folks wondering if you were going to be sharing your presentation. If you wanted, we could do it as a PDF.
Sure.
Okay.
You could do that. I don't mind that. I know it's a lot of information.
Yeah, folks wanted to keep it as a resource, which is excellent. Good. Okay, so those are all the questions, but other than that, Marie, there are just so many comments from folks saying how wonderful and informative your presentation was. And I have to say, I 100% agree. This was fascinating. It was packed with really, really helpful information. So I so much appreciate you taking your time today. And we appreciate everybody else being here with us and hanging out with
Yeah.
us and doing this training online. I think it's a really great opportunity for all of us to still connect with each other a little bit and to learn, because I guess that's one fortunate thing for our group right now. Our hobby is something we can still do during social
Yeah.
distancing. So I know I'm very grateful for that. And we're super excited to have had you share all this amazing information with us today. So thank you, Marie.
Sure.
And for those that are wondering, we are going to post the recording of this presentation on the HGIC YouTube channel. So it will be available there for everybody to access. You can Google UMD HGIC YouTube and that will bring it up for you. You can also wait until the newsletter comes out in May, and we'll put the link to the newsletter there so that everybody will know where to access it. And we are very excited to continue to offer these kind of trainings and continue to connect with you guys and provide an opportunity for all of our volunteers to still connect with each other. So please, if you have suggestions of topics or speakers that you think might be willing to do this for our group, continue to send them our way and we'll continue to get them set up. We are working on one for May with our horticulture agent from Kent County, Sabine Harvey. So hopefully we'll have that information out to you guys soon, but we'll continue to do this as much as we can. So thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.